present my guest today, Leesa Scanlan. Leesa is a mental health advocate, lived experience speaker and podcast host who uses her voice to raise awareness of domestic and family violence, coercive control and survivor safety. After speaking publicly about her own experience, Leesa has been contacted by many other women whose stories have mirrored her own, reinforcing her commitment to advocacy and systemic change. Leesa is passionate about educating people about the different ways abuse can present, helping communities recognise early warning signs and raising awareness of the support services available so people can seek help sooner. Leesa hopes to be a voice for the ones still finding theirs. Thank you for joining me, Leesa. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm very, very happy to be joining you this morning and being able to have this conversation together.
Yeah, absolutely. We're both in that mental health space, but I'd probably like you to start off, if you wouldn't mind sharing just a little bit about yourself and what was perhaps a pivotal time when you said, you know what, I need to speak out about this and help others?
Sure. So, I've been in the mental health advocacy space for about 20 odd years. So diagnosed with depression and anxiety when I was 18 or so. And so I went on, once I sort of was in more of a recovery state and had some great coping mechanisms in place, I went on to start using my voice in that space. So that mental health advocacy space, originally as a youth ambassador for Beyond Blue. And so I've used my voice to talk about the things that I've experienced and difficult things to help reduce stigma for quite a while. And so, when I went through this experience, I experienced an abusive relationship end of 2024 coming into the start of 2020. I was still sort of trying to process what had happened in many ways. And at some point, I started talking about my experiences online through my Instagram handle, because I've shared a lot of different things over the years as well. I went through the process of freezing my eggs, for example. I shared a lot of that. I had my own podcast, High Tide, Low Tide, which was about sharing mental health stories and seeing the power that there is in connection through storytelling and somebody listening in and hearing your story and being like, oh my goodness, I experienced the same thing, and the power that has for people to feel less alone in their journey. So when I started talking about domestic family violence, narcissistic abuse, coercive control online, and people started connecting in with me through my DMs, reaching out to say, thank you for sharing. I've never had the words to express what I've been through. It just, there was no second guessing that for me. I knew that I just felt it deep within me intuitively that I needed to continue sharing for the people out there, who had been through something similar. But also it was quite cathartic for myself as well.
Yeah, no, and thank you for sharing that. You and I had a brief conversation off air. My first marriage, I left because of domestic violence. Whilst it was physical in some stages, later on it became emotional control and abuse. That's, I really applaud you, because it's soul destroying and it takes your confidence away. So I really applaud you for digging deep and having that self-confidence to come forward and start those conversations. Do you find, I suppose it's like what I do, that people aren't alone, that sharing that story doesn't take people's pain away. It doesn't, but from the mental health perspective, by feeling, oh my God, it's not just me, actually stops that self-talk spiral. Do you find that plays a big part?
Definitely. I think that, in anything, I think if you feel as though you're not the only one, or that you're not alone, it plays a huge role towards self-kindness and also towards recovery. And so when I came out of my abusive relationship, I was actually in one way, very lucky that I have been contacted by many women who had experiences with the exact same man. So it's like I almost got given to me a support group of women immediately who not only had very similar experiences, but like pretty much identical experiences. So
Yes.
that made my recovery and my ability to work through what had happened a lot easier. It certainly wasn't easier, but it made that process better. And so I just wanted to be able to try to do that for other people out there who maybe didn't have that same immediate support network like I did, and maybe were just watching quietly in my stories or watching quietly in the content, but maybe having moments of, I didn't realize that was abuse. Because as well, I found it quite difficult to name what I was experiencing because I'd never been through it before. And I think a lot of us, when we think about, domestic violence or domestic abuse, we tend to think only of the physicality or the physical abuse. So, I'm grateful, there was no physical aspect to my abuse. So he didn't hit me. He didn't yell at me. So I think originally I found it quite hard to name it. And I think that's quite common.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So that's where the self-doubt comes in, it starts coming in. Leesa, do you get experiences of men with this kind of abuse as well? Like it's not just men giving the abuse, it's men actually on the receiving end of the abuse as well?
Yeah, I have been contacted by some men who have also experienced similar things to what I did. I will say that it is very much the opposite way. And that could be because I am a woman sharing a woman's experience. So women may find it easier to relate to my journey and what I'm sharing. And we have to obviously, acknowledge the fact that it does happen with both women and men being the victim survivor. And that's not something I want to discount in any way. But we do see statistically that it is a heavier proportion of women being the victim survivor. And because that's my experience, that's the way I tend to talk about it, because from my understanding as well, the reverse can, there's different nuances when it's the woman perpetrator and the male victim survivor, which isn't my experience. And so I don't want to speak to other people's experience as well. Definitely there are, I have been contacted by both genders.
Yeah. No, thank you for clarifying that. Leesa, are you able to share one of your most powerful, perhaps, experiences in that you went, a moment where you went, yeah, right, wow, this is why I'm doing this? When we've talked about how it's emotionally taxing and expensive on facilitating and doing these things, but it's such an important message. So, yeah, was there a moment you're able to share that say, well, yeah, this is when, yeah, that's why I'm doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's so many little things along the way. And I think sort of towards the end of it, I had made the realization that I was, not being honest with the people around me. And I think initially I thought that I was protecting the relationship or protecting this person who's telling me that they love me by not actually revealing everything that was going on behind closed doors. And I was kept in fight or flight mode. And this is a common manipulation tactic where, I'll be walking on eggshells because I wouldn't want to bring something up. And then, bring up something that upsets me. And all of a sudden that's been flipped and I've done something wrong. And then the argument would go on for hours via text. He'd refused to answer my phone calls. And these manipulation tactics are there to keep you confused and to keep you tired. And my body was just absolutely exhausted. I couldn't eat properly. I was having trouble sleeping. I was just constantly on edge. And so it was, now that it was not only affecting my mental health, it was starting to affect my physical health. And I just knew I couldn't continue to live that way.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. And So what would you either say to your younger self, or what would you say to perhaps a woman at the moment who might be listening to this and sort of going, oh, that's sort of what's happening to me and I didn't realise that?
Mm-hmm.
What's perhaps a
Yeah.
piece of advice you'd give them?
Yeah. If I was to, a piece of advice that I would probably give to someone who maybe is thinking that they're in this position, or they know that they're in this position, is to be super kind to yourself. This
Yeah.
hasn't happened because of the person that you are. This is a choice. This is another human being making choices to attempt to have power and control over you. And these people that are making those choices are very good, very, very good at what they do. And so they come in, like the man of your dreams or the person of your dreams, and they give you a platter of everything that you ever wanted, and they get to know you and they get to learn your vulnerabilities so that they can use that against you. But to people out there who might be experiencing that, 100% just be so kind to yourself and show yourself love. These things are done to you, not because of you.
Yeah, no, very good. I like that answer. Thank you so much. Leesa, you also talked about narcissistic behaviour or narcissism earlier on in the conversation. Is there a pattern? Is there statistically a pattern of people that want to control and deliberately, obviously, as you said, it's a choice, and I like that is their choice to do this. Is there a pattern? Is there the majority, 80% of the men that do this, or the women, the people that behave this way are known narcissists or were raised in a narcissistic background or something like that?
To be completely honest, I don't know, and I don't know what the statistics would be. But what I would say is that, so like narcissistic abuse is sort of a term that gets used generally online. I think that psychologists may have a slightly different view on the way that it's used, because a lot of people who I would say fall into the category of what I would say is narcissistic abuse aren't going and getting themselves a diagnosis as a narcissist, because they probably don't think that they are one. And in saying that, the confusion and the manipulation and everything that occurred to me, I actually started to question throughout my relationship if I was a narcissist, because of the way that he was projecting that onto me. And another great sentence I learned throughout this process was their confession is their projection is their confession. So often people within this space will actually project their behavior, the things that they're doing onto you. And I'm going down a different rabbit hole right now, but an amazing example I can give you of this is there was one day I had been through my fridge and I'd found all these beers at the back. I used to drink a lot of craft beers. So I'd collected all these beers and they'd sat in the back of my fridge for a couple of years. They were out of date and I forgot they were there. So I emptied them all down the drain and put the cans in my recycling bin in my kitchen. And then he came round later that evening and I noticed him staring in the bin. And I was like, what are you doing? Like, what are you looking at? And he's like, well, there's all these beers in here. Like, who were you drinking them with? Like, so I was like, they were in the back of the fridge. I forgot they were there. And he's like, well, I've asked you if you had beers here before and you always said no. And I was like, I don't understand what you're getting at. And I'm like, are you saying that I was drinking the beers with someone else? And he's like, well, I guess so, because I don't know why they would be there otherwise. And I was just so perplexed, because like never would that have like even gone into my head. I was like, you can check the dates on the cans. They expired 2 years ago. And then like it was off for the rest of the evening. When we broke up, I realized, or I found out because multiple women contacted me, that he was being unfaithful throughout our entire relationship. So when I say their projection is their confession, this is a really great example of that. He projected his ability to be faithful onto me. So it's like the yellow car theory, like you see what you're aware of in the world. He saw infidelity because that's what was normal to him, whereas I was just confused because I'd tipped out like 8 beers that were no good anymore. Yeah. So I don't think that answers the question you originally asked me at all, but a really great example.
That's So true, and quite reflective on that,
And the
go on.
sorry. And what I was going to say is how it kind of links back to the narcissism. So a narcissist will perpetually see themselves as the victim. And often
Yes.
people who have a pattern of this behavior will position themselves as such very early on. And this is something that I now can see as a red flag that I didn't know at the start. So you become very empathetic to their life because they've always been the victim, whether it was at school, in their family, in past relationships. If they say to you, all of my exes were psychos, get ready, girl, because you're about to be the next. And I have no doubt that that is exactly where I am. But yeah, the narcissist is the perpetual victim. And of course, like, I'm not a psychologist. I can't diagnose. I'm going off of, like, you know, what we read about and what I've learned through my own experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's powerful. And, you know, it's that lived experience, though, that I believe. I mean, I'm not a psychologist either. I'm lived experience, a mental health first aid trainer, and I've done my diploma in positive psychology and wellbeing. But people tend to benefit from my story as well. And what I think what we do is we are a stepping stone to that gap. You know, so we're
100%.
leading people, you know, with the confidence and to give them the tools that will lead them to the right professional help. Just on that, interesting, probably a little bit off a rabbit hole too, but it was in what you said about that, you know, their projection is their confession. In a lot of the stuff that I've read, you know, there's often the person that wants out, and normally a male doesn't have the confidence to say they want out, so they project all this onto you so that you're the one that ends up going, I won't do this anymore, and out. And it's their easy way out, I suppose. And so in that meantime, but they're damaging someone's emotional behaviour. And I suppose, you know, none of us are perfect, and we've all, you know, perhaps not done everything perfect at times and had the right conversations at the right times and reacted the right times, the right way. But I think, you know, the intent behind. So when it's the intent is to control or coerce or deceive, then that plays into, again, not a psychologist, but I would suspect it plays into another role. Fascinating.
I think, and what you've said around intent, and it's also pattern. So if this happens once, okay, twice, okay. This is a continual pattern, and what we often see in abuse is that cycle of push and pull as well, which, you know, takes us through to the trauma bond. It takes us to cognitive dissonance, that intermittent reinforcement. So there's all these things. So it's like, it's not just, and like you said, none of us are perfect. I've made plenty of mistakes as well, but it's intent and it's pattern that really, really matter here as well.
Yeah. Totally agree. This episode is proudly supported by Workbench for the Mind, a practical mental fitness program created by me, Susie Evans. Workbench for the Mind is for anyone who feels overwhelmed, stuck, or unsure what to do next, but isn't ready for therapy or doesn't know where to start. It's not about fixing yourself. It's about learning simple, evidence-based tools to understand your thoughts, emotions and behaviours and putting them somewhere you can actually reach when life gets hard. Think of it as the bridge between I'm fine and professional support. With guidance, structure and care along the way, you can learn more or join a supported intake at susieevans.com. And so one thing I found when I eventually left, I actually left twice. And the second time I went back because he had stopped drinking and his behaviour, you know, we were seeking help and we had a child. So for me, it was, well, I want to go back and make sure that I don't have regrets later in life, that this was, you know, his learned behaviour. And so, you know, he's actually trying that sort of thing. But when I finally left, you know, it was amazing how many of my friends came to me and said, why didn't you tell us? We would have helped you. Why didn't you tell us? And it's like, I don't know, because I felt shame, because I felt stupid for allowing myself to be manipulated that way. So it didn't make me feel very good about myself. Yes.
I think that's extremely common. so common. Like I think for myself, like at the start, the first couple of fights we had, I shared those with a couple of friends. And then as the time went on, I felt embarrassed because how could you share, like, this is how I was feeling internally, was like, how can I tell these women that are my closest friends this horrible thing that happened, and then go back. And like, so they've already sort of supported me through this, and now I've done it a fourth time, a fifth time. And it's not that they wouldn't have supported me, they absolutely would, but I was, as you mentioned, like the feeling of shame and embarrassment and like thinking, and like, how have I ended up in this position, but also feeling so stuck because I felt so much love at the same time, coming in and going out, like, because it wasn't all bad either. Like, there was a lot of moments of very intense love, which is where that cognitive dissonance comes in, because your brain finds it hard to comprehend that it's the same person that is choosing to love you and show you all of these wonderful feelings, and then also is the one hurting you. So it takes the path of less resistance, and it holds on to the good feelings, and it reminds you of those and kind of pushes the other ones to the side a bit. And so it makes it harder to leave.
It feels like it may be bad, but it's all you know. So it's home.
Yes. And especially in your situation as well, which is very common for a lot of women, in that, like, you have tied housing, you've got shared children, you've got shared finances. So it makes it very difficult to leave, much more difficult than, say, for myself, where I didn't have any of those things holding me back. And so I have extra empathy for women who are attempting to leave an abusive relationship, but have those things that they're up against. Not only that, but we know that statistically it takes a woman an average of 7 times to leave the good. And not only that, but that's when she leaves is actually the time at which she's most at danger, which is terrifying when you're in it. So, you know, it's so important that when women are potentially getting ready to leave, that we have spoken about things like exit plans and having safe people that you can turn to, having somewhere to go, and knowing where to go as well to get that support. Because again, for myself, I didn't ever feel physically unsafe in my relationship. And the moment that I left, I was terrified. I started hearing things outside of my windows. I had security cameras installed in my home. I had a safe word set up with a friend that lived you know, a few blocks away, so that if I had texted them, they knew something was wrong. And I've never like felt like that ever before in my life. So I have so much, you know, love and empathy for people who are trying to leave but can't yet see how they can.
Yeah, because financially, I didn't have the means. I had to borrow the money for a deposit on a house to rent because, and I could go on, but it's not about me. But it's, you know, it is. But I do remember what we had counselling at one stage, and then we had individual, and the counsellor said to me, usually always have a spare set of car keys and a little bit of cash somewhere in case you have to leave. And I was like, oh, no, that's not me. And she said, let me tell you, Susie, usually this ends in one or two ways. One is dead and one's in jail. And she said, usually it's the wife in jail. So, you know, you need to look after yourself. And I was like, oh, okay. And you do, because you go back to that person that loves you and think, no, they wouldn't really get that bad. But anyway. But so it's interesting. But I also want to, you know, where would someone nowadays? So if there was someone listening and they thought this sounds a bit like me, or I need some extra help or whatever, where would you suggest they go?
I think it does vary from state to state. So I will say that like 1-800-RESPECT is a really good place to start. So that's a phone number, 1-800-RESPECT. So they would then be able to direct people to the right places within their state. Obviously, we're in South Australia, so I highly recommend Women's Service Safety Services South Australia. They're actually the organisation that work alongside South Australian Police to deliver the domestic violence disclosure scheme, which we are incredibly lucky to have here in South Australia. I don't believe it's available anywhere else in Australia at this point. There are some wonderful people trying to get that implemented, but they're really, WSA, or Women's Safety Services SA, are a really great place to turn to as well. So when I used the domestic violence disclosure scheme, I was basically paired up with a caseworker from WSA, and they were incredible. They talked me through like safety plans, things I hadn't thought about, and then other support services as well, like I believe it's called the Leaving Violence payment, and that is a payment that can be accessed in order to help you leave safely. So it could be that you need to change the locks on your home, for example. It could be that you've left a relationship where you actually didn't have access to your money. So you might be given that money to be able to buy yourself food, to take care of your children. Maybe you've had to flee and you haven't taken any of your clothing with you. So to help you set yourself up, to help you get into a rental, that type of thing. There's a lot of other incredible support services here in SA, like Catherine House, also like the Zara Foundation as well, that offer different things. And that's sort of like from an organizational perspective. I actually found a lot of help through different content creators online as well. So for myself, like there's an Instagram page called Beyond the Bruise, and she talks a lot about different nuances within domestic violence. And that was so helpful. Podcasts, I found podcasts very helpful in helping me to understand what I had been through. So just that sort of education piece, I found very helpful myself as well. You know, living in the age of the internet, there's so much wonderful support services available at the end of our fingertips. But I just think, for South Australia, those ones were incredibly helpful for me. I do see a lot of content from Domestic Family Violence New South Wales. I think they are like kind of leading the way a little bit around domestic family violence, which is awesome to see.
Yes. No, I think I'm not specific, but I believe they've got some legislation in there too for protecting, which is amazing.
Yeah. I think they're the first state to bring in the laws making coercive control illegal. Was it there or Queensland? Either or. I think it was New South Wales.
Yes, I think it is. I've got a feeling it is too.
Yeah. And that's that's passed legislation here and will come into effect in 2027, which is amazing. Because like I couldn't do anything with the police in my case because no law was broken, which is very common also. Because they know where the line is and they know not to cross it.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you like to see from your advocacy work and from all the advocacy for the domestic violence and coercive control? Where would you like to see this in 5 years' time? Where would you like to go, yes, that's it. This is finally we got here.
Yeah. I think like for myself, I would like to see like the education piece really expand, because we don't know what we don't know. And if I think about mental health, when I was diagnosed 20 years ago, there was huge stigma. No one's talking about it. I didn't know anyone who had been through the same thing. And so I've seen there's still room to improve, but we've seen a huge shift over the last 20 years. And that's what I would love to see within this space as well, where it's not swept under the rug, where it is spoken about, and where people actually learn what it can look like, so we can recognize the signs and symptoms earlier, and that we have the chance for early intervention within the domestic family violence space. And we can recognize that for ourselves, but also within our loved ones. That's probably one of the things. I think the other thing that we need, I think it's three things for me. The second thing is, like, what's the right way of putting it? there needs to be further reforms. There needs to be more ways for something to actually be done within the system. So systemic change, like the Labor government's reform to dating apps that I've spoken on before. So if you have a proven history of domestic family violence, sexual assault, sexual abuse, you shouldn't be on there. Those type of things, because one reform isn't going to fix the problem, but the more safety mechanisms we have in place, the better. It's going to help less people be affected and keep more women and victim survivors of all genders safe. And then the third one is around whether it's research or like how are we getting in to stop it happening in the first place? I don't know the answer to that, but like how are we, I guess even if we think about the next generation coming through, how are we having more conversation with them? How are we finding out what the root cause of somebody taking a path where they could become a perpetrator? How are we getting in there so that we aren't having to have more support services and having to do those things, having to educate more and more? How are we stopping it happening? And I think that's the biggest part. I don't know what the answer to that is, but I think for me, those are the three things. I think my role is within the education space, personally. I think that's where I kind of fit in through lived experience, through, making people aware of what can happen and what's out there to help.
Yeah, no, I'd love your 3 points there, Leesa. And I think one thing people forget is that with, in this space, it is non-discriminatory. So it's lower social economic. So it's non-discriminatory. It can happen in any suburb, in any household, any, and by any career professional or non, So I think that's one thing that people need to understand. And I agree with you. I don't know the answer, but I'm a big believer on the education and the educational space of our young men coming through and young women. So it's that education instead of, I'd like to see that in, another 10 years time that we've got a different society, that it's minority, not a average, statistic there.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important to acknowledge that people from the Indigenous community, people with some form of disability, and also people from within the LGBTQIA+ community are also even more so at risk. So I think it's important to consider in the future, in the now, really, what are we doing to also help those groups that are even more so vulnerable to this?
Yes, absolutely. Well said. And, the Indigenous in, particular with their costs of living and access to daily food and things like that, and that the pressures that puts on their family dynamics or domestic situations. So, yeah, totally.
Absolutely.
Leesa, is there anything I could talk to you all day. Is there anything that we haven't discussed this morning, something that you'd like to point out or talk about that we haven't?
I think we've kind of covered off everything quite well, and I think it's also so important to sort of make sure that the support services and stuff like we have talked about are in there, so that it comes to a sort of full circle. Yeah. But no, I think we've got everything within there.
And yes, we'll also put all those links in the podcast so people can access them. So in closing, one final piece of advice or one statement you'd like to close with?
I just think to the victim survivors out there who are maybe listening and maybe they haven't had the language to explain what happened to them, or they've felt really alone throughout it. I just want those people to know that it's not their fault. They didn't choose this. This was done upon them, which I've kind of alluded to earlier, but there is hope, and you don't have to live within this forever. And I just, encourage you to take one step, whether it's speaking to a trusted friend or family member and maybe being a little bit more open than you have before, or maybe going online and safely looking at some of that information when you can. You don't have to change the world in one day. You don't have to pack your bags and leave in that one day if that's not right for you at this point. But one small step, and I just want people to feel empowered and loved, and know that there are a huge support network of women and victim survivors, all genders out there who, are rooting for you to take back your life.
Yeah, no, and that's great. A great closing statement. And I think on that too is that, is getting that help for yourself to have the strength to either stand up for yourself, create the world, educate within your dynamics. If that's an opportunity, it doesn't necessarily mean always just walk out the door straight away. So I think
that
guiding
might not be a safe thing.
No. So guiding those steps to get your head in the correct mindset to allow you to make the right decision and choices for you and your situation.
Definitely.
Leesa, thank you so much for joining me. I've loved our chat. And as I said, it could go on, but we might check on you again and see how things are going. But thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity for coming along. I knew that the moment that I met you, I can remember, and I knew that our paths were crossing for a very beautiful reason. So I feel so blessed to have been on here with you today.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you to my guest, Leesa Scanlan.